I still remember the sound of his last breath. People think death is loud, dramatic, like in the movies. In my memory, it was the quietest moment of my life. One soft exhale, a small flutter in his chest, and then nothing. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it fills you from the inside out. For weeks afterward, I would wake in the middle of the night and reach for him. My hand would slide across cold sheets, searching for warmth, for that familiar shape, for the reassuring weight of his arm over my waist. Every time my fingers closed on emptiness, it felt like losing him all over again. I was 63 when he died. We had been married for 41 years. I used to think that was a lifetime. Now I know that a lifetime can end in a single word: cancer. When the doctor said it, the room didn't spin. There was no dramatic music, no collapse to the floor. My husband, Daniel, squeezed my hand and nodded, as if the doctor had just told us the weather forecast. I watched his profile as he listened to treatment options and probabilities and side effects. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were calm. Somehow that made it worse. I wanted him to protest, to shout, to refuse this reality, but he just nodded and asked practical questions. Later, in the parking lot, he leaned against the car and looked up at the sky. "Well," he said, "I guess we finally have an excuse to stop going to those awful work parties." I laughed. It burst out of me, loud and ugly, mixed with tears. He pulled me into his chest and held me while I shook. "We'll fight it," I said into his shirt. "We'll fight it with everything we have." "I know," he said, "and whatever happens, I had a good run." Then he tipped my chin up and smiled. "Especially with you." We did fight. 4 long years. 4 years of appointments, needles, scans, and waiting rooms that all smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. 4 years of learning the language of illness, markers, margins, metastasis. 4 years of pretending that statistics didn't apply to us. Before the sickness, our life had been ordinary in all the most beautiful ways. We met when we were both in our early 20s at a friend's tiny apartment party where the music was too loud and the punch was too strong. He spilled his drink on my shoes, apologized 3 times, and then asked me if I wanted to step out on the balcony before we both went deaf. We stood outside in the cold, sharing a cigarette like teenagers, even though neither of us actually smoked. He asked what I did, what I liked, what I hated. I told him I loved rainy days, old books, and dancing in the kitchen. I told him I hated liars and cold coffee. He showed up at my workplace 2 days later with a thermos of hot coffee and an umbrella. "Just in case it rains," he said. I married that man 3 years later. We built our lives in layers, tiny habits and routines that, over time, turned into a shared language. A half-raised eyebrow across a crowded room that meant time to go. A hand on the shoulder in the supermarket that meant, "Don't worry, I've got this." Weekend breakfast taken slowly, with newspapers spread across the table and our bare feet touching under the chairs. We had 2 daughters, both loud and stubborn and impossibly alive. He was the kind of father who built blanket forts and burned pancakes and learned how to braid hair badly but tried anyway. I remember coming home one afternoon to find glitter everywhere, on the couch, in his hair, on the dog, and our girls sitting proudly in paper crowns while he bowed and called them "Your Majesties." We fought too. Of course we did. Over money, over schedules, over whose turn it was to take the car in for servicing. There were slammed doors and icy silences, and one fight in the grocery store parking lot that ended with both of us laughing hysterically because we realized we were shouting about laundry in front of 3 complete strangers. But always we came back to each other. Apologies murmured in the dark, hands reaching out across the bed. Love was not always fireworks between us. Some days it was just the decision to stay, and then he got sick. At first it was little things. He was tired, lost some weight, started complaining of back pain. Getting old, he joked. I believed him because I wanted to. When the pain grew sharper, when he started waking in the night with a grimace, he tried to hide. I told him to see a doctor. He postponed it twice. By the time they found the tumor, it had already begun to spread. Those 4 years stretched and folded in strange ways. Some days flew by in a blur of tests and prescriptions. Others dragged, every hour stretched thin by fear and waiting. There were good moments, unexpected pockets of joy. We celebrated our 40th anniversary with takeout and sparklers on the back porch because he was too weak to go out. And the girls came over with ridiculous paper hats and a cake that collapsed slightly on one side. He kissed me like we were 25 again. There were terrible moments too. The first time he vomited from the chemotherapy and looked at me with shame in his eyes. The day his hair began to fall out in clumps, and I watched him stare at the sink in quiet disbelief. That night, I shaved his head for him in the bathroom, both of us catching each other's eyes in the mirror and looking away. When I finished, he rubbed his scalp and said, "At least now we match." And I swatted his shoulder, laughing through my tears. As the years passed, the disease stole more and more from him. His strength, his appetite, his ability to walk up the stairs without resting. Eventually, it took his independence. The man who used to carry both girls at once on his shoulders now needed help just to sit up in bed. I became his nurse. I learned to manage medications, to change sheets without disturbing tubes, to coax him into eating at least a little. I learned how to smile calmly when the fear in my chest felt like a fist. In the last 2 months, the bed came into the living room. He wanted to be near the window. The hospice nurses came twice a day, a quiet blessing of our healthcare system. They checked his vitals, adjusted his pain medication, and walked me through what was happening to him in careful, gentle words. When they left, it was just the 2 of us again. Sometimes we talked about the girls, about memories, about nothing at all. Sometimes we just held hands and watched the world go by outside. I memorized every line on his face, every freckle, every way his eyes crinkled when I made a joke that landed. One afternoon, I found him looking at our wedding photo on the shelf. "Do you regret anything?" I asked. He thought for a long time. "I regret not letting you drive more," he said eventually. "Maybe then you wouldn't still be so bad at parking." I threw a pillow at him. He laughed, and then he reached for my hand. "I don't regret us," he added quietly. "Not 1 second. In the end, death came on an ordinary day. No storm, no dramatic sunset. The house smelled like soup and antiseptic. Our daughters had just left to take a shower and a nap, promising to come back later. It was just him and me. His breathing had grown shallow, each inhale a thin thread. I sat beside him, holding his hand, counting the seconds between breaths without meaning to. I told him I loved him. I told him it was okay to rest. I told him I wasn't ready, even though I was saying it was okay. He exhaled once, softly, Then there was a pause. I waited for the next inhale. It never came. There are moments when your brain knows what's happened, but your body refuses to accept it. I remember calling his name once, twice, louder. I remember shaking him as if I could start him again by sheer stubbornness. I remember the nurse arriving, her gentle movements, the way she closed his eyes with such care. Later, after the phone calls, after the quiet shuffling of people in and out of the house, after my daughters had finally gone home to their own beds, I stood alone in our bedroom. His side of the bed was perfectly made. The glass of water he left on the nightstand still had a faint ring on the wood. His reading glasses sat on top of a half-finished book. I stood there until my legs gave out, then slid to the floor and screamed. Not words, just sound. Raw and ugly and enormous. I screamed until my throat burned and my chest ached. The house absorbed it and gave nothing back. Grief moved in with me. It took his place at the table, in the car, on the couch. It followed me into every room. People were kind. They brought food, sent flowers, wrote messages telling me to stay strong, whatever that meant. My daughters checked on me constantly, torn between their own families and their fear of leaving me alone. But life, relentless as ever, pulled them back into its current. Eventually, the casserole stopped arriving. The phone rang less often. The world kept turning. I stayed still. There is a particular loneliness that comes after the initial rush of grief. When everyone else has moved slightly forward and you're stuck in the moment your life split into before and after. Days blurred into each other. I ate when I remembered. I slept when my body shut down from exhaustion, usually after too many hours staring at the ceiling. His things were everywhere. His jacket hanging by the door, his shaving cream by the sink, a coffee stain on the kitchen table where he'd spilled some months before and promised to sand it out one of these days. I couldn't bear to move any of it. One afternoon, an old friend came to visit. She looked around the house, at the photographs, and the quiet and the shadows under my eyes. "You know he wouldn't want you to disappear like this," she said gently. "I'm not disappearing," I replied. "I'm just here." "You're surviving," she said. "That's different from living." I hated that she was right. Before she left, she suggested something that sounded absurd to me at the time. "There's a community center downtown," she said. "They have a dance class. You used to love dancing." The idea of moving my body to music felt impossible. My limbs were heavy, my heart heavier. Dancing was for people with futures, not for widows pacing through memories. But grief had already stripped so much from me. One evening, when the house felt particularly tight around my chest, I looked up the class online. The next week, I put on a dress that hadn't left my closet in months and went. The community center smelled like floor polish and coffee. Inside the gym, an eclectic mix of people stood around awkwardly. Older couples, a few single men, women in all kinds of shoes that were not meant for dancing. The instructor was a tall woman with too much energy and a smile that almost made me turn around and walk out. "Welcome," she said. "If you have 2 left feet, you're in the right place." I stood at the edge of the room for the first few minutes, stiff as a board. The music started, something slow at first, then faster. My heart raced, not from exertion, but from panic. This felt like betrayal somehow, as if every step I took further from stillness was a step further from him. But then the instructor came over and took my hand. Just sway, she said. Don't think. Let your body remember. So I swayed, clumsy, offbeat, painfully aware of how exposed I felt. But as the minutes passed, something strange happened. My body, which had been wrapped tight with grief, began to loosen. My feet remembered how to follow a rhythm. My arms remembered how to move in ways that weren't just reaching for a box of tissues or a phone. The music didn't erase the pain. It just reminded me there was more inside me than sorrow. I went back the next week. And the next, months later, that same friend who'd pushed me into the class sent me a link. Volunteer dance partner positions on a cruise, she said. You should apply. The idea sounded ridiculous. Me, at 65, on a cruise ship, dancing with strangers, leaving the house, the city, the country. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt less like running away and more like stepping into a new chapter. Even if only for a little while, I filled out the forms. I hesitated before hitting send, then did it anyway. A few weeks later, I received the confirmation. I'd be joining a ship departing from a port I'd never heard of, somewhere far from the familiar streets of home. Packing was surreal. I laid out dresses that had only ever seen weddings and anniversaries. I added sensible shoes and one slightly impractical pair because they made me feel daring. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom with my suitcase and whispered into the room, I don't know if this is crazy, but I'm going. The flight was long. I stared out of the airplane window at clouds and tried not to overthink. When I arrived at the port city, the sight of the massive ship took my breath away. It loomed above the water like something out of a dream. Too big, too bright, too full of unknowns. On board, everything felt new. The constant low hum of the engines, the endless stretch of ocean in every direction, the way the light bounced off the water at sunset, turning everything gold. And then there was the music. Always music somewhere, drifting down hallways, spilling out of lounges, echoing on the open decks. My role was simple. Dance with guests who wanted to dance. Be friendly, be patient. Talk if they wanted to talk. Stay quiet if they didn't. At first, I felt out of place. The first time an older gentleman asked me to dance, my legs nearly buckled. But as we moved slowly around the floor, he told me about his late wife, how they used to dance in their kitchen every Sunday. We had our last dance in the hospital room, he said. Just a little sway with my hand on the bed rail. Best dance of my life. I realized then that I wasn't the only one carrying a ghost onto that dance floor. Night after night, I danced with people from everywhere. Widowers and widows, couples celebrating anniversaries, single travelers who had decided they were tired of waiting for someone to join them. With each step, I felt my heart stretch, making space for other people's stories alongside my own. There were moments when I almost forgot the weight I carried. Moments when the laughter came easily. When the music lifted me until I felt light again. And there were nights when I went back to my small cabin and cried quietly, overwhelmed by how much life and loss existed in the world. When the cruise ended and I came home, my house felt different. Not smaller, not bigger, just changed. His slippers were still by the door, yes, but when I looked at them, I didn't feel crushed. I felt grateful for the years we'd had. I realized I could miss him without drowning. One evening, standing in the kitchen, I said something out loud that I had never dared to before. I want love again. The words sounded strange in my own voice. For a moment, guilt stabbed through me, sharp and bright, but another feeling rose up alongside it, something like hope. A few days later, with trembling hands, I made an account on a dating website for people over 50. It asked for my name, my photo, my interests. I stared at the blank boxes for a long time. How do you sum up a life? How do you explain that your heart is both full and broken, that you are both already taken and suddenly free? In the end, I wrote simply, widow, 60s, loves rainy days, music, and late-night tea. Looking for companionship, honesty, and someone who knows that life can be both beautiful and cruel. The first messages trickled in. Some were kind, some were strange, some were clearly from men who hadn't read my profile at all. I went on coffee dates, 17 of them to be exact. There was the man who brought a binder full of photos of his classic car and spoke of nothing else. The man who made 3 jokes about his ex-wife before the drinks even arrived. The man who confessed, 20 minutes in, that he was actually still married but emotionally single. I learned to smile, to excuse myself, to go home and make a cup of tea and remind myself that trying was still a victory. I was close to giving up when I saw his message. His name was Raymond. His profile was simple, almost old-fashioned. Widower, retired, enjoys books, jazz, and fixing broken things. His eyes in the photo were kind, with a hint of mischief. He wrote to me about a song that had moved him to tears recently and asked if I'd ever had that happen. We exchanged messages for a week. Then he asked if I would like to meet for coffee at a small bakery downtown. I got there early, nerves buzzing under my skin. I almost turned around twice. But then he walked in, holding a small bunch of daisies. "For you," he said. "I read somewhere they mean new beginnings." We sat at a corner table. The bakery smelled like butter and sugar and warmth. At first we talked about safe things, the weather, our favorite books, the merits of real paper over e-readers. Then, slowly, we began to talk about them, our late spouses, our grief. He spoke of his wife, how she'd been gone for 8 years, how he still sometimes reached for her in his sleep. I told him about Daniel, about the last breath, about the cruise. We did not rush to comfort each other. We simply listened. It felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed for too long. When I walked home afterward, I realized my cheeks hurt. It took me a moment to understand why. I'd been smiling. That was the beginning. Not of fireworks or instant soulmates, but of something gentler. Calls in the evening, walks in the park, shared dinners that turned into long conversations about everything from politics to childhood memories. We did not pretend our pasts didn't exist. We carried them openly, like photographs we were proud to show. 3 years later, we went to Paris. It was his idea. I had never been. We booked a small hotel and spent our days getting lost on purpose, wandering narrow streets that smelled of bread and coffee, ducking into bookstores and laughing when we mangled the language. On a gray, drizzly afternoon, we decided to climb the Eiffel Tower. The wind was sharp, the kind that bites your cheeks and makes your eyes water. Halfway up, I wondered aloud why we hadn't chosen a warm museum instead. On the second level, he suggested we step to the side, away from the crowd. He looked nervous. I thought perhaps he was just cold. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a tiny silver ring. Not a diamond, not gold, just a simple band, clearly inexpensive. "I'm not 25, he said. "I don't have years and years to promise you, but what I do have, I want to share with you. Would you consider spending whatever time we have left as my wife? My breath caught. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer imperfection of it, the cheap ring, the wind whipping my hair into my face, the tourists jostling around us, someone nearby complaining loudly about the weather. But another part of me, a quieter, deeper part, felt the weight of the moment settle into place like a final puzzle piece. Yes, I said. My voice shook, but the word was clear. Yes. A teenager nearby saw us and hurried over, asking if we wanted a photo. We handed him my phone. The picture he captured is blurry, speckled with raindrops on the lens. My eyes are red, my hair is wild, his glasses are crooked. It is, undeniably, the most beautiful photograph I own. That was 21 years ago. Now I am 83. Raymond is 86. Mornings in our house are slow and gentle. He makes the coffee because I still can't be trusted not to burn it. I put on a record sometimes. Yes, an actual record, and let old songs fill the kitchen. Every once in a while, he'll take my hand and spin me, just enough to make me laugh. We have our aches and pills and doctor appointments. We move more carefully now. Stairs are taken with caution. Chair arms are used for leverage, and there are little pill organizers on the counter that would have horrified our younger selves. But there is also a tenderness in this stage of life that I never knew existed. A softness in the way he tucks a blanket around my knees. A reverence in the way I smooth the collar of his shirt before we go out. Sometimes, when the house grows quiet in the evenings, my mind drifts back to Daniel. To the young man with coffee and an umbrella. To the father with glitter in his hair. To the patient who squeezed my hand through the worst of it. I talk to him sometimes, in my head or under my breath. Thank you, I tell him. Thank you for loving me so well. Thank you for every year, every moment, and thank you for not holding me so tightly in the past that I couldn't walk into the future. Loving again did not diminish my love for him. It expanded it. It taught me that the heart is not a single room with only one key. It is a house with many chambers, each one lit by the memories of those we have loved and lost, and loved again. People sometimes ask if it feels strange, having loved two men this way in one lifetime. The truth is, it feels like a blessing I never expected. I had one great love that ended in a hospital room, and another that began in a bakery with daisies. Both are part of me. Love did not save me from grief. It walked with me through it. First as a memory, then as a possibility, then as a hand in mine in a foreign city in the rain. When I lie in bed at night, my bones aching more than they used to, I can still hear the music of my life. It began with a shy man on a balcony, pausing between sentences to gather courage. It faltered in a hospital room where machines went quiet. It picked up again in a community center gym with scuffed floors and hesitant steps. It swelled on the ocean under the stars. It steadied in a small bakery that smelled like sugar. It arose on the iron bones of the Eiffel Tower in the rain. The song has changed tempo many times. It has been loud, and it has been so soft I could barely hear it, but it has never stopped completely. It's different now, slower perhaps, but it's still playing, and for as long as it does, I will keep dancing.